Hi everyone, this is Rob Watson, the module leader for TECH1502 Introduction to Community Media, and this is the video overview summary of the topics we'll be covering in the 21st lecture, which is about academic evidence gathering. And the focus of this lecture is to talk about ways in which we gather evidence for our reports. So your coursework D is a report assignment, and we've looked at the critical thinking process, and we've looked at the report management structuring process and the formatting and the layout of a report. What I want to look at in this session is the idea that what do we provide as evidence, and what is the academic process that supports that, and what kind of evidence is valid and what kind of evidence is less valid. So what we'll do is we'll work through, if you like, fairly standard academic approaches to evidence gathering, and the idea that this is a standardized process which is recognized throughout the world is that we look at evidence as something which is vital to statements and arguments and discussions that we might have. So we should always be thinking, what is the evidence that we've got for our suggestions, what it is that we're proposing as an idea, what's the evidence about that. So at the moment, we're faced with a particular challenge. There's a kind of moral outrage about fake news, and it's occupying people's attention in terms of the way that social media is driving news, people's perception of news, into directions which are unfounded and contradictory and not based on evidence. And so this is something which is an important process. And it might be possible to argue, and some do, and that and some people in prominent positions argue this, is that one person's fake news is another person's real news. Well, to what extent is that sustainable? And the academic process should, if it's operated independently and objectively, be able to demonstrate that with sufficient evidence, we might not agree with the conclusions and the inferences that are drawn from the evidence, but if the evidence is collected carefully and in a transparent and open and verifiable way, then we should be able to engage with a discussion about what that evidence means in practice.6However, some argue that we should just accept on trust what people say. Some argue that we should just, it's if you like the difference between academic credibility and propaganda. So some people argue that we just take what experts say for granted, and that they know best, and actually there's a whole level of questionable academic input to things like the tobacco industry, where money was the driving factor to maintain the illusion that tobacco was harmless, when in fact it was causing and has caused many deaths by cancer. And many academics and medics, doctors and so on, researchers and so on, are guilty of abusing the academic process because they held back information which otherwise pointed to the detrimental effects of tobacco. And challenging people's expectations about knowledge and information can be a difficult process, a difficult social process. But as long as that process is open, transparent and accountable, and that people are called to account for their conclusions, if you like, based on the evidence that they've gathered, then hopefully we'll be able to move forward in a way which is progressive and not regressive. So the academic process is a very important one, and it's something which requires a way of thinking which says this isn't just a conversation between ourselves, but this is a conversation which contributes to ideas which are going to be laid down in the future for people to follow, other people to follow. So we're engaging in the academic discussion which sets the terms of the debate, if you like. And so there are questions about what we include within that as evidence and what is excluded as evidence. So the evidence gathering process is very important. We don't want to just be fueling conspiracy theories, if you like. We don't just want to be looking at the world and taking it at face value, but we actually have to, it's not a black box. It's not something which is self-contained and there's a magic process going on somewhere. No, we can verify and we can check and we can ask questions about this process. And as important as problem solving is, there's another process which is which leads on from problem solving, which is problem posing. And I suppose what we're looking for with the academic process is the whole idea that we change our mindset from thinking, okay, we're dealing with these problems, but there'll be another set of problems coming along that once you've cleared the patch of ground, it kind of you realise that you've got a hell of a lot more work to do in the future. So what are the kind of questions that we need to ask about that? And what can we anticipate as being of potential interest and of potential concern in the future that we need to skill up and equip and ask the right questions and put the right solutions in place in order to deal with those problems, and to measure that in an ongoing way which is open, transparent and accountable, and which isn't just based on people's status or hearsay or their opinion, but is something which can be challenged and engaged with in a social and collaborative, the collegiate emphasis that is part of the academic process. Collegiality and discussion is an essential component. You don't work in isolation. You're part of a learning community. So what is the evidence gathering techniques and how do we use evidence as a way to support our arguments and discussions? So what I'll do in this lecture is I'll go through a number of the core issues that, kind of like how do we gather literature, what's the difference between qualitative and quantitative forms of evidence, what's the purpose of a report in terms of we're using information sources that are a useful guide for other people to follow on, and how do we place those reports, how do we situate that evidence so that it's part of a practical and useful debate and discussion, and then how do we draw conclusions and inferences from that? So is the logic of our thinking, is it sustainable? Is it something that we can it makes a difference that we can verify with? Now, we're not aiming for a kind of absolute truth here. What we're looking for is something that's plausible, something that moves us forward, and that's something which, if you like, it's not going to challenge everything. It's going to be an incremental change, a small change. Our contribution matters, but if many people contribute to this process, then it gathers pace and it becomes a wider conversation which we're part of. Right, so the notes for this session are available on the DMU Commons wiki. Just go to wiki.our.dmu.ac.uk and you can download them from the TECH1502 section. If you want to carry on the conversation, head over to talk.our.dmu.ac.uk, start a new topic or join in one of the existing topics that's already listed on the forums, the discussion forums. But I'll see you at the lecture.